We are joined in the studio by Dan Perry, international affairs analyst. Dan, good to have you back with us. Looking at Syria right now and focusing first on the IDF side of things. A lot of fuss from certain corners on just what the IDF has been doing along the border, whether it be seizing a strip of territory here in the buffer zone. It really does all appear defensive or precautionary at this point. Do you agree that this is somewhat, so far, appearing to be the sensible activity of Israel in a border facing the collapse of the state next door?
Yeah, especially given that there was not unreasonable fear that the new government could be aggressive, given that they have ties to al-Qaeda. So, sure. On the other hand, when's the last time in history you heard of another country destroying the entire military, practically, of a different country without a war, right? I mean, it was on the edge. It's true that the rest of the region, doesn't have much case against Israel taking up buffer zone. But of course, Israel's reputation when it comes to occupying territories temporarily is pretty bad. On the other hand, Israel has a case, and they haven't been too piggish about it. It's really only the area right next to the border and the incredibly high territory of the Syrian Hormone. And they've made clear it's temporary, although maybe not that temporary.
Israel had a lot of success during some of the peaks of the civil war there with this Operation Good Neighbor, where the IDF set up camps along the border here for humanitarian aid, for medical treatment. I feel, do you agree that it should be the time for Israel perhaps to extend a hand in peace, to be broadcasting louder that this is what we'd like to see out of this region, is a peaceful resolution? Should that be a wider
In fairness, Netanyahu did make that statement, but yeah, should it have been louder? I think so. Should they have been even more clear about why they're doing what they're doing with taking out much of the army and the Navy and everything else? Chemical sites is eminently defensible. At the end of the day, this attaches to the reason why much of the world, at least for the first week, wasn't really celebrating the fall of a terrible, despotic butcher of a dictator, because they're wondering, could this be worse if they really are Islamist? You can be cynical and say that is why Ahmed Ashara, also known as Jolani, the new leader in Syria, has been making such peaceable-sounding noises. I mean, from the sound of it, he is far less aggressive towards Israel and certainly far more democratic in terms of Syria domestic policy than what preceded, by far.
Kind of astounding, actually.
Can we believe that? HTS is a little bit weak in southern Syria. They will probably need a coalition with secular forces, with non-Sunni Islamists, and so maybe he has to make these noises. On the other hand, when he was a jihadi, he was a very young man. And who amongst us has not done foolish things as a young man?
He's grown, certainly. Yeah. An intriguing character. We'll get into more of his latest in a moment. Now, the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, they've launched a series of crackdowns against armed groups in Jenin this week, resulting in some rare open clashes and casualties. Now, this attempt to reassert their authority in these cities is drawing attention, as many of the emergent and independent armed Palestinian factions growing in the territory are thought to have ties or even open allegiance to Iran. And Tehran has worked extensively to smuggle weapons and cash into these groups in the hope of, inflaming another volatile front for both the Palestinian Authority and Israel, as it turns out. Again, in the studio here with Dan Perry, and now joined by our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaran. Ariel, coming to you first. I mean, does the PA, Palestinian Authority now, it appears that they're trying to take back some semblance of control, at least in this part of Jenin. Do they have a chance? And on top of that, what do we know about the Iranian inroads in these areas?
Look, so we've seen these efforts by the PA security forces to try and reassert their authority, their sovereignty in these parts of the northern West Bank. They haven't succeeded until now. And in essence, Israel operating in these areas is because the Palestinian Authority fails to do so. Now we're seeing this latest attempt by the PA. It does seem a more serious attempt, you could say, at least publicly, optics-wise. At the end of the day, we have to remember that any attempts to draw out a post-war Gaza, on the American side, they said they wanted to see, if the PA were to be involved, it would have to see a reformed Palestinian Authority to get rid of the corruption and all the internal challenges that are going on there.
Yet to see that, I should add.
Yet to see that, and what we could be seeing is President Abbas's attempt to say, hey, we don't need reforms, we can do it ourselves, here, look.
Okay.
And so That's one. The other is also, as the PA is hoping to get more involved again in administering post-war Gaza, they understand that it's also securing their ability to assert their authority to regain some semblance of sovereignty in these areas. Obviously, this is accepted with a lot of happiness by Israel, but time will tell the test of continuity, consistency. There's still some time until we can see that they're actually making up for that test.
Dan, bring you to this, and on the Iranian angle, are they the menace that we are led to believe they are, reported are, and trying to stir up trouble in the West Bank as well?
I think we know that the Iran and Hamas had hoped that, among the multi-pronged war they're declaring on Israel, the West Bank would erupt in a new intifada, and that largely hasn't happened. It largely hasn't happened because of Israel's counterterrorism, but also I think we have to be fair, the PA as well. And I agree with Ariel. I mean, this positions this action in Jenin is partly to position the PA in the conversation about post-war Gaza as being the authority that can reasonably return to Gaza, from which they were expelled by Hamas in 2007. Is Israel happy about this? I mean, a reasonable Israeli would be happy if that could emerge as a thing to do with Gaza. Better than leaving Hamas in Gaza, and better, in my view, than permanent Israeli occupation on the ground, including taking care of the civilians in Gaza. But the government of Israel has been engaged in an all-out demonization of the PA because they need to prevent that scenario, which I deem reasonable, from emerging as the dominant one. And so they've been sending all their spokespeople to this and other studios claiming that the PA is as bad as Hamas, which is pretty much as preposterous a claim as I've ever heard from a government. So I have to think Israel's a little bit dualistic. Do they want the PA to emerge as fantastically effective in the West Bank?
Yet to be seen. Look, on the West Bank, and specifically these Area A, parts of the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority-controlled areas, where we have seen, let's call it the lesser of all the fronts on Israel this year. Is there a model of success there to be followed in terms of the way the IDF operates on a daily, nightly basis there, when we compare it to the policies that were in place in Lebanon or Gaza that turned out to be so disastrous?
I mean, Israel has no great options, and the situation in the West Bank is not ideal by any stretch of the imagination. It too much embroils Israel in accusations of apartheid because the Palestinians and Jews have different systems, and they're so close together.
Complex.
It's not a great system, but on the other hand, diplomacy is the art of the possible, and the Middle East is the arena of the least bad option. And, Israel very reasonably fears a complete pullout would lead to a Hezbollification of the West Bank. And an area that is fully controlled by the Palestinians ends up perhaps being controlled by a resurgent Hamas in the future. And we saw on October 7th what that led to.
Popularity is high across the West Bank, really all Palestinian municipalities.
I think
Hamas is popular.
Perhaps the least bad option is for Israel's government to drop its nonsense and do what is needed to get the PA to be able to go back into the West Bank, into Gaza rather, and replicate in Gaza for a while what they're doing in the West Bank, where Israel does have the right to go into Deir al-Balah or Rafah or whatever when the PA is failing to control potential nests of terror. But let us hope that in the wake of the evisceration of Hamas, there are no such nests of terror. And maybe alongside the PA taking back Gaza, or maybe in some sort of consortium with help from the Arab world, whatever, they also reform themselves on the civilian side and emerge as the government in waiting of an independent Palestine.
Positive potential outcome. I'm going to add another layer to our discussion here, another aspect here. And the Israeli negotiating team is in Doha for working level talks with Qatari mediators on, let's term the remaining issues in a potential Gaza ceasefire and hostage deal.
Netanyahu, since the beginning of the war, said he does not Abbas, not Hamas. Abbas, that would be Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. So with this administrative committee of technocrats, it would be Hamas and Fatah once removed, and that is considered to be something that can be sold to the Israeli public.
I've been critical of Egypt, really from the onset of this war, and whether it be their what appears to be complicity in the arming of Hamas across the border, their virtual caging Palestinians into Gaza throughout the war, no one allowed out, not even women and children. What's your thoughts on how they may now emerge as the central arbiter of a potential ceasefire, of some form of resolution right now to the conflict?
I don't think it'll change the essence that they don't want Gaza to become their problem, so they're never going to allow Palestinians in large numbers to enter Egypt. But they do want to, be seen as a major player, maybe the major player in the Arab world, in the Muslim Arab world, which they had been all these years. And there's a sense that that's been supplanted by Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states in particular. So, of course, there is some jockeying in that regard. And Ariel mentioned some competition between Qatar and Egypt as to who will get the credit. I think, interestingly, we'll also see competition between Biden and Trump about who will get the credit. And, I suspect all four will seize credit and let them, because Israel clearly needs to find some elegant solution to the impossible situation they've put themselves in, where Hamas insists on an end to the war, and Israel insists no Hamas, but then Israel also is nixing all the alternatives to Hamas. And Netanyahu is blamed for using this as an edifice to prolong the war for his political reasons. It's such a mess. If they need to invent some fictitious committee in order to pretend like that's what's running Gaza and give them a face-saving way out, well, as I said before, let them.
They thought the resistance had ended. They are heavily mistaken.
So, with Hamas severely weakened and Hezbollah cut off from Iran by the Syrian rebel takeover, are the Houthis Iran's last capable action against Israel?
And we're joined in the studio still by Dan Perry, international affairs analyst. And on the topic of the Houthis, Dan, look, they've continued their attacks as other fronts in this war have quieted or collapsed. The U.S. made some welcoming offensive effort in the last couple of days, not sure how effective, but this group is still disrupting Red Sea shipping. They're still attacking Israel, seemingly at will. Is this the next arena of offensive effort by Israel? And on the U.S. side here, is President Trump incoming now? Is he the geopolitical disruptor already that affecting the situation? Do we expect to see more from him?
I think so, as indeed he has clearly disrupted Iran and Lebanon and Syria, every other front also. Look, about the Houthis, they're criminals, okay? Yemen has a per capita income of around $600. Israel is almost 100 times more. The Houthis, the war the Houthis have imposed upon, not Lebanon, Yemen, the war the Houthis have imposed upon Yemen has killed almost 500,000 people, most by disease, but also in fighting. Instead of doing their best to bring this nation back on its feet, they're spending many millions, firing sophisticated hypersonic ballistic missiles at Israel that can crush them. It's madness. I don't know if they're directly taking their orders from Iran. We just saw the Iranians celebrating their big success. But I do know that it's in the nature of ridiculous things that they eventually come to an end. Now, the world has been a little bit reluctant about schooling the Houthis the way they need to be because, well, we know they're fanatics. We know that Iran is pulling the strings to a degree. They're tough to get to because they have dispersed their missile launchers all over the place.
Mountainous and rural place that they...
Yeah, it wouldn't be easy. I mean, I think we need to be a little bit humble and remember that the Saudis were fighting the Houthis for like 7-8 years and failed to dislodge them, despite the U.S. assistance that they received. That said, though, these miscreants are badly impeding global maritime trade. They've caused Egypt to lose billions of dollars in revenue from the Suez Canal, which Egypt can ill afford, and there will come a point where they will need to be attacked very seriously. And it is, a strike against the Biden administration that this has been tolerated. I mean,
the U.S.
Biden's foreign policy
playing whack-a-mole defense.
A little bit, but you know what? More could have been done.
Yes.
These half-hearted airstrikes that achieved less than Israel did in its one serious strike on the port of Hodeidah.
Is that where you expect now a new Trump administration probably to take a different tack?
Or maybe Biden himself. Yeah. Biden still has a month or more. I would expect that a coalition arises, and hopefully it need not involve Israel, that puts an end to the madness represented by the Houthis, who sort of are the last man standing for the axis of resistance.
And again, as you mentioned, the region's poorest country. If this is what remains in the axis, perhaps things are headed in the right direction.
One thing that must be said is that the Houthis were actually, they had the chutzpah to actually be planning to invade Israel, or maybe even Jordan, or maybe Israel through Jordan, by deploying in Syria along with the Shiite militias from Iraq and also Hezbollah for a time, and obviously Iranian operatives. And Bashar Assad didn't attack Israel directly, but he enabled this. Presumably, the new authorities in Syria are not going to allow the Houthis that avenue to attacking Israel or doing Iran's bidding against Israel, and so maybe this the rocket they fired was lashing out against the dying of the jihadi light.
We shall see. Dan Perry, as always, good to have you with us. Thanks for chiming in on all the topics.